The sun hung low over the quiet streets of Brookside, washing the storefronts in a gentle amber glow. Officer Daniel Reyes parked his cruiser 2 blocks away, out of habit more than necessity. Though officially off-duty, the uniform still clung to him, not just in fabric, but in presence. He wore it with the quiet pride of a man who believed in service, even if the world seemed to believe less and less in men like him. It had been a grueling month. 12-hour shifts, protests, noise, calls at 2 a.m. to calm disputes, chase thieves, comfort overdose victims. The city had been on edge, and so had he. His hands still bore faint bruises from where he'd wrestled a desperate man with a broken bottle just 3 nights ago. His mind carried heavier bruises, the kind no one saw. But today was different. Today he allowed himself a moment of stillness. There was a small restaurant on Elm and 3rd, a tucked-away place with yellow awnings and wrought iron chairs. Ellen's Kitchen, it was called. It held memories. His father used to bring him here after Saturday patrols, both in uniform, both exhausted but happy, sharing meals and small, proud silences. Daniel hadn't been back in a year, not since his father passed. He stepped inside, the bell over the door chiming softly. The smell of butter and garlic filled the air, wrapping around him like a familiar hug. A couple of diners glanced up, a child waved at him, and he smiled politely. But something was off. The young man behind the counter stiffened at the sight of his uniform. He looked about 25, wiry build, messy hair, with a name tag that read, Jeremy, manager. His jaw tightened the way people's did when they were bracing for something they didn't like. Daniel offered a polite nod. Table for 1, please. Jeremy didn't smile. Instead, he walked around the counter, slowly, arms crossed. Yeah, no. Daniel blinked. I'm sorry? I said no. We're full. Daniel looked around. The restaurant was barely half full. 4 tables sat empty near the windows. Jeremy's voice was louder now, calculated to reach other ears. We don't serve cops here. Not in uniform. Bad for the vibe. The room quieted. Daniel's eyes didn't waver. He'd heard worse, but not here. Not in this place. I've been coming here since I was a kid, he said quietly. Used to sit right there with my father. He pointed at the booth near the window. Jeremy shrugged. Not my problem. Things change. People don't want to eat next to someone with a gun on their hip. Behind the counter, a young waitress froze mid-step. Her name tag read Kayla, and her hand trembled slightly as she held a tray. Her eyes darted between Jeremy and Daniel. Daniel looked around once more. No one spoke. A few averted their eyes. One man checked his phone like this wasn't happening. Daniel offered a small, tight smile. Understood. He turned slowly and walked out, the bell over the door jingling again. Outside, the wind had picked up. He walked back to his cruiser, sat down in the front seat, and exhaled. His stomach growled. A reminder he hadn't eaten since breakfast. But the hunger was now tangled with something deeper, something familiar. He leaned his head back against the headrest and closed his eyes. A flash of memory. His father's laughter, his hand thudding the table, the sound of forks on plates. That laughter was gone now. And so, it seemed, was the warmth this place used to hold. Back inside, Kayla stood frozen. She watched Daniel walk away and swallowed hard. Her fingers clutched the edge of her tray until her knuckles turned white. She didn't say a word to Jeremy. Not yet. She just turned and walked into the kitchen, blinking quickly. In the back, behind stacks of plates and simmering pots, stood a stocky man with salt and pepper hair. Tony, the line cook. Ex-military, barely spoke unless he had to. He looked up as Kayla entered, her face pale. What's wrong? He asked, wiping his hands. Kayla's voice cracked. Jeremy kicked out a cop, said we don't serve his kind. Tony's jaw clenched. He didn't say anything right away, just slowly took off his apron, folding it with the precision of a soldier. His eyes didn't blink. He muttered something under his breath, something about disrespect, and walked toward the back door. Kayla pulled out her phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before a voice picked up. Hello? Mrs. Farrow, Kayla whispered. It's Kayla. You need to come down here. It's about Officer Reyes. Meanwhile, Daniel remained seated in his car. He wasn't angry, not in the explosive sense, just hollow. He opened his glove compartment, pulled out a protein bar, unwrapped it slowly, and took a bite. It tasted like chalk. A soft knock on his window startled him. It was Kayla. She held a foil-wrapped sandwich in her hands. Her face was red, eyes glistening. I know it's not the same, she said quietly. But you shouldn't leave hungry. Daniel hesitated. You'll get in trouble. She smiled sadly. Let me worry about that. He took the sandwich and nodded his thanks, unsure what to say. I called her, Kayla added. Called who? She looked back toward the restaurant. The owner, Mrs. Farrow. She built this place with her husband, remember? She'll want to know. Daniel stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the sandwich in his hand. Roast beef, mustard, pickles. His father's favorite. For the first time that day, his throat tightened. Not from fatigue, but something warmer. Hope. Inside Ellen's kitchen, the air had shifted. The conversations that had been casual and pleasant were now hushed, uneasy. Diners exchanged glances, whispering to each other in tones too low to be understood. The weight of what had just happened, of who had just been sent away, settled like a fog over the tables. At the register, Jeremy stood tall, arms folded, face unreadable, but behind the bravado was the faintest glimmer of satisfaction, like someone who thought he'd just made a bold statement. He looked around, daring anyone to challenge him. No one did, at least not yet. Kayla, the waitress, moved quickly through the room, eyes glassy. She refilled coffees with robotic precision and dropped checks without a word. Her mind wasn't on her work. It was outside, with the man who should have been seated inside, maybe enjoying a hot meal, maybe smiling in the booth he once shared with his father. In the kitchen, Tony wasn't cooking anymore. The grill was still hot, the fryer still humming, but Tony had stepped into the small break room. He stood by the time clock, arms crossed tightly over his chest. His military instincts were flaring. To him, what happened wasn't just rude, it was dishonor, disrespect. He knew Officer Reyes. Not well, but enough. Reyes had once responded to a late-night break-in at Tony's apartment complex. Calm, respectful, efficient. He remembered how Reyes had gently reassured his panicked neighbor, a single mom whose door had been kicked in. No arrogance, no aggression, just service. And now someone had tossed that same man out like he was garbage. Tony picked up his phone and sent a short message. It was only 4 words. You'll want to come. Outside, Daniel sat on the curb by his cruiser, the sandwich in his lap untouched. He didn't know what to feel. He'd faced worse situations, more dangerous calls, and outright threats in the line of duty. But somehow, this small, quiet rejection cut deeper, maybe because it came from a place tied to childhood, a place of comfort, or maybe because it didn't come with sirens and shouting, but with quiet humiliation. He watched as a family, a couple and their 2 children, stood up from their table inside the restaurant. The father spoke to the mother in a hushed voice, then gestured toward the door. A few seconds later, they all walked out, bypassing Jeremy entirely. As they exited, the father made eye contact with Daniel and offered a nod. Not a grand gesture, just a small signal of solidarity. It meant more than Daniel could explain. One by one, a few more patrons started to gather their things. A teenage boy in a hoodie nudged his dad and said, "That's the officer who helped at the school lockdown last year, right?" The man looked at Daniel through the window, frowned, and stood up. Jeremy noticed. "Where are you going?" he asked sharply. The man replied coolly, "Somewhere that doesn't disrespect the people who keep our kids safe." Jeremy rolled his eyes, muttering something about cop worship and backward thinking. But Kayla had already stepped outside. She approached Daniel again, her phone still in hand. "She's on her way," she said softly. "Who?" "Mrs. Farrow, the owner." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Isn't she retired?" "She still cares," Kayla said, her voice quiet but firm. "She built this place from nothing, with her husband, the same man who gave you that old leather booth seat for your 10th birthday, remember?" Daniel smiled faintly. "I remember. He used to say I'd grow into the uniform before I ever earned it." Kayla laughed softly, then turned back toward the door. She paused, looked over her shoulder, and added, "She said she'd be here in 10, but knowing her, more like 5. Back inside, Jeremy was pacing now. The energy had shifted, and he knew it. Half the dining room had emptied. The staff wouldn't meet his eyes. Tony had emerged from the break room, arms crossed like a silent mountain, standing at the edge of the kitchen like a watchdog. Kayla re-entered, tying her apron back on. Jeremy cornered her near the ice machine. "You called her, didn't you?" "I did." "Unbelievable," he sneered. "You just cost yourself a job." "I'd rather be unemployed than ashamed," she snapped back. Jeremy scoffed. "Don't get all noble, it's a new era." Places like this need to take a stand. Kayla narrowed her eyes. You took a stand, all right, against a man who's risked his life for this community. That's not brave. That's cowardice dressed up as policy. Tony stepped closer, wiping his hands with a towel. You know, he said calmly, I fought for a country where people in uniform were respected, not spat on. Jeremy turned to him. Yeah, and look where that's gotten us. Tony's eyes hardened. Careful what you say next, son. But Jeremy backed off, muttering under his breath again. The confidence he had earlier was cracking, minute by minute. Then the bell over the door jingled. A silence fell, heavier than the last. She walked in with calm authority. Ellen Farrow wasn't a tall woman, nor did she wear anything flashy. Just a plain blue blouse, slacks, and an old silver locket that hung low over her chest. But when she entered the room, every head turned. The heart of the restaurant had returned. She scanned the room once, taking in the half-empty tables, the tense faces, the staff standing awkwardly by. Then her eyes landed on Jeremy. You, she said firmly. Office. Now. Jeremy stammered. I didn't do anything wrong. She raised a hand, silencing him. Now. The staff parted like waves. He followed her into the small office behind the counter, the door clicking shut behind them. No one knew exactly what was said, but inside, Ellen's voice never rose. She didn't need to shout to deliver consequence. You embarrassed this place, she said simply. I was trying to send a message, Jeremy argued. People don't want cops around anymore. It hurts business. You think business comes before dignity? Before kindness? I thought I was doing what people wanted. You don't run a mob, she replied sharply. You run a restaurant. Or you did. He stared. Wait, you're firing me? Ellen leaned closer, her voice quiet but firm. My husband was a sergeant. My son still walks a beat in the city. And that man you threw out? He used to share meatloaf here with his father while I poured the coffee. You don't get to erase that history. You don't get to erase our values. She held out her hand. Keys. Jeremy hesitated. Now. Defeated, he pulled the keyring from his belt loop and dropped it in her palm. Outside the office, the tension lifted as the door creaked open. Jeremy walked out, pale, head down, and left without a word. Ellen followed close behind. She didn't speak to the room, not right away. She simply turned to Kayla. Where is he? Kayla smiled softly. Out front, still waiting. Get him something hot. I'll bring him in. Tony was already plating a fresh meal. Kayla grabbed the drink tray. And Ellen Farrow, matriarch of Ellen's Kitchen, walked with purpose toward the front door. The door of Ellen's Kitchen opened for the third time that morning with a chime. But this time it wasn't met with silence or glances. It was met with purpose. Ellen Farrow stepped onto the sidewalk, her steps deliberate, her heart thudding hard beneath her calm exterior. Officer Daniel Reyes stood by his cruiser, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. His sandwich, still half-wrapped, sat beside him untouched. When he saw her, he straightened instinctively, just like he had as a young teen when she used to ruffle his hair after meals. Mrs. Farrow, he said quietly, surprised. Ellen stopped just a few steps from him, studying the man before her. His face was older, the lines deeper, but the eyes were the same, steady, respectful, always scanning the world for someone to protect. I heard what happened, she said softly. Daniel gave a small shrug. It's all right. No, she said. It's not. He looked down at the sandwich. I didn't want to cause a scene. You didn't, Ellen replied. But Jeremy did, and it cost him his job. Daniel blinked. You fired him. I fired him before he even realized I'd walked through the door. A pause. Ellen stepped forward and gently placed a hand on his arm. Daniel, you belong in that place more than half the people who eat there. You and your father, God rest him, you made Ellen's Kitchen a second home. You don't get kicked out of your own home. Daniel's throat tightened. It's just different now. The world. Ellen nodded slowly. Yes, but our values don't change. Respect, gratitude, memory. You wore that badge through the riots, through the floods. You helped deliver a baby on 4th Street last winter. Don't think people forget that. He gave a small smile. They forget, but not you. She grinned. That's because I've lived too long and buried too many to let memories slip that easy. Behind her, Kayla stepped outside holding a tray. Hot soup, fresh sandwich, and a glass of iced tea. Tony followed, setting a plate of warm cornbread down on the cruiser's hood with the precision of a man plating metals. Ellen gestured toward the restaurant. "Come back in." Daniel hesitated. "I'm not sure everyone in there wants to eat next to a cop." Ellen raised an eyebrow. "Then they're welcome to leave. Your family." Inside, the atmosphere had shifted again, but this time it pulsed with quiet anticipation. The remaining customers, some of whom had considered leaving earlier, now watched as Ellen led Officer Reyes through the front door. No one said a word at first, until the man with the teenage son stood and clapped once, then twice. It was slow, but it spread. A few more people joined in, then another table, then another. A round of quiet applause filled Ellen's kitchen, not loud or theatrical, just warm, earnest. Daniel's ears turned red. I don't know what to say," he muttered. "You don't have to say anything," Ellen replied, guiding him to the booth by the window, the one he and his father used to sit in. It had been reupholstered, but the plaque was still there, small and brass. "In memory of Sergeant Luis Reyes, always welcome." Daniel stared at it for a long second. His fingers brushed the edge of the wood like he was shaking hands with a ghost. Ellen placed the tray in front of him. "We kept the booth," she said, "even when the upholstery wore down, even when we had to fix the spring. I told them this one stays, always." Kayla smiled and slipped a napkin onto the table. "That's your dad's favorite soup, potato and leek." Daniel looked up, his eyes misting. "Thank you." Tony gave a firm nod. "Glad to see you back where you belong." Daniel picked up the spoon, but he couldn't quite eat yet. Instead, he looked around the room. Some people were still watching. Others had gone back to eating. A child waved again. A young woman smiled softly at him. It wasn't applause anymore. It was presence. He leaned back in the booth. For the first time that day, he allowed himself to breathe fully. In the kitchen, Ellen stood by the counter with Kayla and Tony. "He's going to be all right," Kayla said. "He's tougher than he knows," Ellen replied. Tony sipped his coffee. "We needed this. Not just him. All of us." Ellen nodded. "Every now and then, we need to be reminded who we are." From the corner, an older man, one of the regulars, raised his cup toward Daniel. "You keep showing up, so we should too." Daniel raised his iced tea in return. Word spread quickly, as it always does in small towns. By noon, photos of Daniel sitting in the booth had hit local Facebook groups. "Local officer, welcome back to Ellen's kitchen after manager refused him service." Comments poured in, some critical, most supportive. Veterans, EMTs, teachers, former classmates of Daniel's. One comment read, "That officer helped me after a car crash in 21. He stayed with my son until the ambulance came. He deserves every bite of that meal." Another, "I worked with Sergeant Reyes, his dad. Proud men. The kind you don't forget." And then, "I stopped going to Ellen's after it got too trendy. I'm coming back now." Ellen didn't read every comment. She didn't need to. She saw it in the way people walked through her doors for dinner that night. A firefighter in uniform, a retired Marine in a wheelchair, a young paramedic still in his responder vest, all sitting in booths, all quietly welcomed. Daniel finished his soup slowly. When he stood to leave, he turned to Ellen, unsure how to properly thank her. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. She smiled. "That's where you're wrong. I had to. Because if we don't stand up for each other, then what's the point of all this?" He held out his hand. She took it, then pulled him into a hug. As Daniel stepped back into his cruiser and pulled away, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The yellow awning of Ellen's kitchen stood bright against the sky. But what stood out more was the hand-painted sign in the window. Kayla had put it up right after he left. "All are welcome here, especially those who serve." And beneath it, smaller letters, "In honor of Sergeant Luis Reyes and Officer Daniel Reyes. Booth 4 reserved always." Daniel smiled, and for the first time in weeks, the weight on his chest lifted, not because of a grand apology, but because someone remembered who he was, and reminded everyone else. Hit like and subscribe for more real and powerful moments.